One of the qualities of Britishness is tolerance. We've always been a very tolerant nation. I believe our tolerance is being tested at the moment, but that's certainly at the core of our value system.
It was a very Scottee style show, even though it's very different to a lot of his work. It's, you know, scary, dangerous stuff, but it's also very familiar, sadly.
Scottee is dealing with a subject that's difficult to tackle, but I like the way that he's doing it really head on. It's not showing that the gay community is like freedom and full of everything that's okay, you know, that there's issues there that need to be addressed as well. So that's really important, and I think it's really important right now.
It is really a great show as well visually. The performers are amazing, and yeah, and that just that inherent conflict in it is really, really intriguing and interesting.
It's theatrical, complex, interesting, and completely different to anything I've ever seen.
There's got elements of cabaret and live art, and I think it's kind of, you know, something which is developing the form of contemporary theatre in quite an interesting way.
It's important to process your views about the world and all these views we have about equality. And I think a lot of my friends in London will come and see the show and will appreciate it in that way.
I think it's a show that I would recommend not just to LGBTQ people or, you know, people from the queer kind of scene. I think it's an important show for everyone to see, really.
It's good, but it also means that I might not be eloquent or ordered, or a little bit kind of visceral and reactionary. Which is what it is. Because it's real.
Is it? I thought it was a pantomime.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us tonight, putting words in your mouth. And good evening to the people who've joining us online as well, the Scottee followers, the Roundhouse followers, all of you. Hiya! So, I'm Gateau, Chocolat, and this, of course, is Scottee, provocateur, auteur, theatrical practitioner, and he has made this show. Yeah, and watching his trajectory has been really, really interesting, because I think it's over 10 years now, and
Sorry, someone's got their Nokia 3210 too close to a hi-fi. Can they move that? Sorry, George, you were saying something very profound about me.
Actually, it wasn't at all. We just to give you an idea of trajectory, we used to do gigs at somewhere called the Supper Club, and Scottee would do something where he'd pierce blood in his face and slap himself, and the wig, that exact wig. And I would do something with a ribbon dance, or I don't know, you know. And
but even before that, Glastonbury,
12-hour shifts, rolling in mud, you know, all of that. And now, in 2016, you've made this show, which is incredibly topical, and I dare say, I think we're just going to talk about it to begin with, and then we'll open up for questions about how you feel and your thoughts and whatever it is you want to ask. I think I'll start with you and what actually prompted you to make the show. Where were you at kind of seeing your work before? And this is making a statement, but without your voice in it. I mean, your voice ends up in it at the end, but this is not kind of autobiographical. What pushed you here?
It started off as I just finished doing The Worst of Scottee, which was the other theatre show that I made for In Here. And I was thinking, difficult second album, what will I make my next show about? And kind of at the same time I was starting to think about who I was going to vote for in the election. And I kind of didn't trust anyone, as I think a lot of people felt at that time running up to that. They were like, who? Which one? So I thought, I know, I'll go on Facebook and I'll find like where other people are voting. And I weirdly was like thinking like, how are working class queer people voting? Because maybe I'll get something from that. And then I found this group called EDL LGBT. Yep, it's a thing. And I was like really, I found the thing like very bizarre that existed within that, because there was lots of talk around EDL around that time. And I was thinking, right, so they've got an LGBT, and they didn't call it like a group, they called it a division. So it's like, okay, so it's this kind of pseudo-militarized queer thing. And so I just started to kind of stalk it and just be like, who is there? And it was like working class queer people, and pictures of them at EDL rallies at the back with like a rainbow flag, looking a little bit frightened. And then I started to really look at the intricacies of who was there. And I found like the leader, and I found their social media, and I basically did that thing that you do to people that you went to school with. You just like stalk them online and you work out profiles for them. And I kind of became quite good at it. And so then I found all these other groups that they were members to. And the other, I guess, quite prolific one has become is UKIP LGBT. Again, another group that I thought, how does that even work? And so just by finding those two groups, I thought, right, I've got to kind of do something with this, because this is bizarre. And I was kind of making stuff with audio and silly little podcasts at the time. And so I said to the Roundhouse, I want to make this show about these kind of two groups. And they kind of looked at me like, oh, right, okay, this is going to be harder than the last one. And so in January this year, I got on a train with an audio producer and spent a week getting on different trains, staying in different hotels, speaking to different people. So by this time, those
But how did you find the people they were speaking to?
Well, they're all members of the kind of public profiles, and they all post on these groups. And I just approached them. I was like, hi, I'm making a theatre show. Would you like to be in it? And it was, it's quite an odd thing to do, to be like, oh, hi, can I meet you? And from the 20,000 people that are across two groups, I approached about 127. I approached 127, I know that. And 20 people got back to me, quite questioning, and I interviewed 8 people across a week, and we used 3 voices in this show. And so it's kind of just happened all by accident, and then the world has done what the world has done, and then this show has become like, oh wow, what foresight you had, and it's like, oh no, so yeah, all completely by accident.
So out of interest, the people that are in the show, are they coming or have they been to see the show?
They're aware of the show.
Yeah.
One of them would like to come to see the show. One of them probably won't. And yeah, I think yeah, it's interesting because you know, they live quite public profile lives online.
Yeah.
They are, you know, if you want to call ambassadors for these political groups, and in EGL's case, non-political group. And so kind of asking them to voice their opinions isn't as frightening because this is stuff they say, this is stuff they believe. And the weird thing that I found from them was actually they were all kind of nice people. And I found that really, I found it quite upsetting that I met these people who come from a very similar background to me. We could talk about things that we liked. We had a very similar experience of queerness. And then when we talked about the P word, we just were on opposite sides of the room. And it was tough because I think in our heads it's really easy for us to think, oh, well, the enemy is across the road, and we know what they look like because we know how they dress. And what I realised is actually these people in their head think that actually they are fighting the good fight, and so it kind of confronted me with a lot of, you know, how I thought about the world as well.
So, and how many times have you been in the room since the show has opened here?
Yeah, I have. Yes, I've been in the room for 5, 6 times with trial audiences as well.
Okay, so making it is one thing, and we'll talk about that and how you found your incredible, almost virtuosic lip-syncing performers. Great job, great job, great job. Making it is one thing, and them having to listen to that material and deal with it, which again we'll get to. But I think putting it in this room and this context is a completely different thing for a number of things. People who expect drag and gay to be a certain thing and go, oh my God, it's Scottee's B-side show. It's the next show. What's it gonna be? Well, I'm American, I don't know. There's that. And then there's also people who have no idea of this. So I think what's really interesting is those people who come and then are completely hoodwinked by what they're watching. They don't know that this is where the show's going to go. But also people who are so cushioned by a privilege and then don't know that this is actually a thing. So how has it sat in the room?
Uncomfortably, which is the whole point. Yeah. I think people know by now that if they come to see my show, it's likely that they'll either get covered in something, I'll pick on them, I'll get them to confront some form of thing that they don't want to talk about. So I was very adamant from the start when we were like talking about how this show's going to be marketed, that it would be in all of the kind of gay white press, because I wanted gay white men to be in the room, because I want that to be the start of a conversation.
Out of interest, where's the gay white press?
Gateau. Well, that's not a cunning question. Everyone's like, ah, ha, ha, ha. She won't answer that. Yeah, I will. Boys, QX, Gay Times, Attitudes. So it's like really looking at that as that kind of, and I'm not saying that those are the only readers, but it's a predominant market, I think. Yeah. And so I was thinking about how, why I make a theatre show, I guess, is it's not because I want to like, as the arts wants us to do, like coerce working class people to come into a building and suddenly enjoy theatre. I'm like, oh no, it's going to be full of like affluent gays or the middle classes, and it will be predominantly white. So what do I want to say to them? Well, there's this big thing called this show. And so, yeah, it's kind of deliberate. Yeah. And I guess I'm really okay with people feeling uncomfortable in this show. Because, you know, I did the worst of Scottee for 2.5 years, and that was an uncomfortable sit-through. So I thought, if I have to do that, now you're going to spend your life listening to what I think you should listen to. So, yeah, it's kind of deliberate. Is that the answer?
No, that's deliberate and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable in the room, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess to answer your question about how it's gone down in the room, I think it's really interesting when we talk with the artists afterwards. We kind of noticed that there are people in the room who agree with some of the rhetoric that is given out through the audio. And that is confronting. Yeah. It's confronting when you've got people, or you can see people like, as if like they're hearing something for the first time. So I'm not kidding myself that this is only like lefty liberal gays that have walked into the room thinking that it's going to be a drag show.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who are here to hear confirmation of belief as well.
Yeah. I suppose it's a good thing. This is the first time I saw it was tonight, which gives me no opportunity to be eloquent or non-reactionary or want to like throw a chair, because it's full on. It's something that you know exists, but I think the interesting thing is to pseudo kind of engage with an idea that you know is racist, as he did, and then say he's not racist. But therein lies the problem. I think you have to agree and accept and own the racism, and then you can start the conversation about how you move forward. And then, you know, like some of the things they said about, it's an incredibly complex issue, and there are points raised that you have to intellectually engage with, like the fact that some parts of Birmingham are completely Asian, and how does that sit with him? But, and you know, you can't go over to India and be a non-apologetic English person. Well, for a start, if you did that, you wouldn't be called an immigrant, you'd be called an expat. So, white man, just calm down with that. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is we don't get to do that. Well, you did. You colonized over 90% of the globe. So, and when our leaders, David Cameron, caught off camera talking to the Queen, going, "Yeah, I had a meeting with those fraudulent Nigerians." It's like, just because you're wearing a suit and you studied at Eton, you're just as fraudulent. How about we have this conversation when you've returned everything that you took from Nigeria and repatriated all the... Should we start there? Or, yeah, or the fact that you don't get to go. You can go over there if you want to. I think it's a hard truth, it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's one that would be the inception of your growth and evolution by actually owning that you are a racist. That is racist. Just, yeah.
But that's why I asked them the question, because, you know, you're sat in the room and, you know, I guess what this show is essentially is revealing what some white working class people will say to another white working class person, which is the real harsh truth of what this audio is about.
Absolutely.
I think for me, asking them that question was to be like, I just need to know whether or not you think that, because I know what I believe, but I need to know where you are with it. And everyone I asked that question to was like, no, of course I'm not. And so that's why I find it so complex, because, you know, when you ask them, like, you know, why are you why are you political? Why do you believe in these values? Like, what is it about these politics or these beliefs that mean something to you? It's like, because we want a fair society. And so, you know, if you ask me why some of my political leanings, which are the opposite to theirs, of why I am politically motivated, is because I want to say, it's because I want a fair society. And so the answer's the same, but how we got there is completely skew-if. And I guess that's why the show is like really sneaky, because at the start, you know, it's like a really boring queer theatre show. It's like, I came out when I was 12, and everyone's like, oh, God. Because we need to know there's parts of them that we relate to.
Absolutely.
And there are things when they talk about liberalism, and when they talk about this kind of demonising of people without an education, as somebody who is non-university educated, I totally understand how people who are educated use that as cultural capital and use that to be able to go, oh, well, dear, you don't want to know what you're saying. And so there's parts of the show where I kind of start with them, I go off, and then I come back, and I'm like, oh, but you just said that. I can't believe you again. And I believe them again, and I go away again. And so it's quite confusing.
It very much is. You know, as we live in a time, the kind of inexplicable lurch to the right. We are, I believe, sitting, living, standing on the axis of change. You know, in our time, gay marriage was approved, and the strive for equality. It's gotten better. But there are, since November 8th, June 24th, it just felt like there was going to be some kind of kickback. And those things have kind of reached their denouement, their crest. And a lot of it, I completely agree with the over-intellectualization of the left, which is kind of partly the problem. But it's just a hard thing to deal with, because in an age of political correctness as well, you can't be seen to call someone a racist, or you say something is racist and people think you're overreacting or his feelings, or and then lecture you on racism. And it's like, you're a white man. You're a white man. And that's not to say that you don't have an opinion on what racism is or can be, but you don't get to lecture me on what my reality is. You don't. Because regardless of how many doctorates you might have on the issue, you're not black. You're not black. And it's so deeply offensive and hurtful in the gay community, where you feel like you're already marginalized, you're already in a ghetto, and then that ghetto gets smaller and smaller and smaller if you're black and if you're fat, and then you have to be, and then are you a wolf or a bear or an otter, and then do you do drag, and then what kind of drag do you do? Do you lip sync or do you sing, or are you an art? You've got balloons with blood, and we can't put that onto the two brewers. Where are we going to put you? So you just keep on literally, and then you just find that there's a solitary, or isn't, where a place that you can exist. There were two things on the morning of the November 9th, after America voted the way they did, that were devastating, exhausting, but also harsh truths that we all need to hear. One of them was, we thought progress was linear. It isn't. And then the other, from Margaret Cho, was, we just didn't do enough. And that's just heartbreaking, because therein lies the painful truth of the situation that we're living in. You can't keep going, oh, it's them, the uneducated or the racist or whatever. You've got to, like that last song. What did the last song say? Something like, you've got
racist friend.
You've got to cut them out. Unfortunately, the burden is on us to not cut them out. That's the painful truth. You've got to reach your hand across that table, and through the pain, through the spitting, go, no, you have to listen. You've got to somehow, through the exhaustion, the pain, the anguish, you've got to kind of keep educating.
But let's just say, when I was going through these groups, I was finding people very close to our home.
Yeah.
I was finding very close people who were part of our community, who were happily attached to these groups. That's what really frightened me. And I think that's the wake-up call with this show. It's like, it's so easy for us to say, they're over there, it's the straight girl, doesn't exist in our world. It so does. And actually, from speaking with the cast every morning and evening before we start and finish, like, it's like even louder and even uglier. Yeah. I just wanted to talk about, you mentioned like that kind of kickback. You know, the reason why we used two-tone music, which was, you know, it's a music label and a music culture that happened in the 80s, where like black British people were saying, this racism is everywhere and it's really affecting us. They were releasing records and talking about it in the early 80s. And it's still happening. And the lyrics in the show today are still like just as like ringing true as they did then. What happens with two-tone music? Well, it got whitewashed. It got appropriated by the National Front. And so, you know, like there's the painful reminder of what can happen. And so, yeah, it's, you know, and again, I was having a conversation today about kind of queer liberation. You know, we see in the 70s where things are like moving forward, and then what happens in the early 80s? Well, then, we have to curtail that, so we'll invent this thing called Section 28. So I do think, you know, this kind of rise of right is kind of retaliation of, oh, well, how dare they like have such a great time? Well, we're going to curtail it. And I just worry that every time it advances, it comes back way more aggressive.
So what's the answer to that?
Don't know. I'm only an artist. I'm only here to show you the rubbish.
Well, that's it. I think
sort it all out yourselves.
I think is just to keep to be vigilant in being a commentary on what this reality is. You know, from yours to mine, and having. Fucking hell.
I just think we've got to chat, but this is it. I think what we do have to do, though, is it's so easy in our like social media orientated lives to be like, delete, block, go away, don't see you. Oh, wow, look at this world that we live in, full of Owen Jones promises. Like, and actually, what this show is about going, let's sit with what the deleted voices have to say for an hour. Yeah. Because I think by hearing them, we understand the origin. And if I understand the origin, I think I know how to sort out that origin for the next generation. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of the people that I met, are very fixed in their political minds. But I think it's just a way of understanding how the other half live and perhaps start a conversation.
Absolutely. I think the conversation is very important, Owen Jones. You need to listen and stop over-intellectualizing. Okay, so we are going to get some questions from the audience about how you felt, what you want to say, questions, thoughts, to performers, to makers, to God, anybody.
Sorry. Can we just interrupt?
It's because we've got people watching at home. They want 4. There are 4 of them. And 2 of them are my mum. Okay, so.
You just mentioned the performers. I was wondering how you picked them and what their feelings were about what they were saying about the show, about the process and everything.
How did I pick them? I've been spying on them for a while. They are all artists who kind of make work in the kind of live art cabaret world. That's kind of where the 2 worlds that I find myself quite often. And they all make work about cultural identity and race and racism. And I guess that was the initial point of like kind of spying them and seeing their work. And I knew I wanted to work with artists rather than actors. I knew I wanted people to bring things to the table. And how did they find it? Well, they're doing a panel talk on Tuesday night, which you can come into, plug. And I think they're going to talk in depth there. I don't want to talk for them. But it was super enlightening working with them because they call me an old queen. Yeah, Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. It was quite difficult because I've just turned 30, so that was quite tough. And kind of just how advanced the conversation and their political voice is so inspiring. And the thing that I learned then as an older queen was to be able to learn from it and to be able to listen. And so we did a lot of listening, we did a lot of laughing, watched a really brilliant video called White Fragility, which I ask everybody to go, it's so good. And did lots of dancing to Beyonce and morning yoga. But yeah, we spoke and acknowledged the fact how horrible the material will be for people of colour to not only hear, but to perform and embody. And so there is like care packages in place. We have a notice board every day where we talk to each other, how everyone's doing and checking in. We just make sure that where we're at with the material. And, you know, I kind of support as best I can as a white queer person. And we work with a really brilliant outside eye called Selena Thompson, who's another artist of colour who makes like really beautiful, very bold, intelligent work, who helped guide me on this journey as well. So yeah.
Now, just out of interest, if we're having a conversation, a difficult conversation, and this could be the safest space at this time to have that conversation, is there a comment from anyone or a question from anyone who may have agreed with some of the items, maybe not all of it, or has something in support of? I think those statements or questions are just as important in understanding the mechanics of why or how you got there. So if there's anyone who is not a kind of, as the videos, the lip sync called it, like a sniveling, moaning lefty, but who, as a matter of your sliding door, has ended up there, it'd be really interesting to hear your opinion or thoughts on it or support of it. And I think if there was any space for it, it's here.
Some friends of mine have got, excuse my voice, some friends of mine have got a place in France, and they always say they work, two of them, they both work, one works in the health sector, the other one works for local council here. And they were both saying about why in France you don't get the translators. Actually, they're both, and then they're sort of saying, so why do we have to provide translators? So that's come up. One of them is a card-carrying Labour Party member, and the other one, I think, is a Labour voter as well. They're a little bit sort of funny about Labour at the moment, but this is exactly the kind of thing that they come out with as normal conversation. The one that actually said this and got angriest of all about the translation, funnily enough, has a more similar background to some of the participants and the interviewees. So I've heard that kind of thing, and you're sitting there and it makes perfect sense for them to say, well, actually, in France, it's more important that people learn French. On the other hand, when I was growing up with friends from school who were from Pakistan, they had people in their house who were cooks, who came with them. They'd been like their ayah, their childhood nurse. They'd never learned English. They'd been here. We all thought it was hilarious that they went around to, one of them was actually a Catholic, and she would go to confession confess in Bengali. We thought it was really funny and sort of nice. But I mean, it's that thing of, I've seen a Facebook group that I know people are a member of saying, learn to speak English Facebook group. So if that counts, I've heard it.
Yeah, that does count. And I find that, I find that's really interesting. My partner's friend been to Paris, and he did like a checklist of Louvre, picture, Eiffel Tower, just like Mona Lisa, all the selfies. And then his next post was about being livid about no one speaking English, which is, weird, but also interestingly speaking to his idea of supremacy and going that you should speak my language, even when you're in a country that I am for. That's what I mean about it's very, very complex. I would try, I suppose there's no definitive, but as being other, I would always try and invest in a different culture. And even though I would sound like an absolute twat, try and speak French or Urdu or, but not everyone has the tools or the
I think it's about being objective. You know, I mean, it's like, I suppose, if you go to France and you understand that the French language, they have a lot of things set up to preserve that, don't they? So, for example, if you try to speak French with a horrible English accent, they laugh at you and they speak English back to you because they know you've made an effort.
Yeah.
And they respect, it's polite, it's considered what you do.
Oh. Yeah.
Thank
you. Yes, please.
I thought that was very interesting what you said. First, it was a brilliant show, Scottee. Thank you for putting on. I think it's very timely and it's really important because, I mean, as you said, the reason all this has happened is because we're not hearing all this stuff, so we get protest votes. So as uncomfortable as I think it makes us, we need to hear it and we need to engage with it and open some sort of dialogue.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the issues is, you were saying about some people don't have the tools to understand and so forth. I think one of the issues is that the lines are becoming really blurred as well. You get things like the Queen's Jubilee, for example, where everyone's out waving flags. They wouldn't define themselves as racist. You might define, you know, it's who defines it, who is allowed to define it, as you said. But, you know, all of those people aren't in the EDL or UKIP for what we know. But so I'm interested in that as well, because I do think that has a bearing on the situation.
What has bearing?
The waving of flags, that very visual Britishness, and you know, all those people who turn out for the Queen's Jubilee aren't necessarily in the EDL or UKIP. But I think, you know, I don't know the percentages, but I you know, expect quite a lot of them voted Brexit, for example.
What, because they have a flag?
Quite possibly.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because
I've spoken to people who, from my generation or from an older generation, I'm not racist, but all they post on Facebook are Union Jack flagged and this sort of thing, and I actually take that up with them and they get very defensive.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use the we, but it's not going to be for everyone or myself. But we, as British people, have a very bizarre relationship with our cultural identity. And it's one of the reasons, but not all of the reasons, why this is put into the room. Because when that is up somewhere, I don't feel like I'm in a safe neighbourhood. I don't feel like, oh, these are people who are really in touch with their cultural identity and they really want to share that with me. I am telling you that I am somewhere politically aligned where you're not. And I think we have the same with the Union Jack, where we see that, and like you said, you make conclusions that they voted Brexit. It's a piece of cloth that's been put together that says something to us. Now, I think there is this incoming breakup of this thing that we call the United Kingdom. Because I think very soon it won't be united, nor will it be a kingdom.
Now.
Yeah. I mean the England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland bit. And I think if we're left with England, which is quite highly likely, which this will then become the flag, if you look at our cultural identity as a country, it's even even more broken up there. How many times have I seen like Cornwall be like, we're an independent state? London, how many times have I seen a Time Out magazine that's like, London calls to be an independent state? We've got Lancashire and Yorkshire, there's big divisions there. If you go to any county, the neighbouring county, there are major divisions. And I think we don't have a sense of unity in this country. And so when I was travelling the country, talking to people and hearing the amount of pain and anger and seeing this in gay venues, that's when I thought, I gotta make a show about this ugly thing that's behind me.
And our Prime Minister saying, if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere, and which harks back to this idea of making Britain great again or making America great again. What does that mean? I know what it means, but we haven't got time. Just one final question, which is Shabazz as a performer. We're running out of time, but Shabazz is in the show, so I think you've earned the right. You've earned the right to pontificate, talk for ages. I love that we both let her. You're just like, I'm going to point it out. I'm on the left. Go.
I think they're not so much questions, but they're things that I feel need to be said and not, from my experience, not accepted or listened to. I worked on a project about 7 years ago exploring the EDL and extremists in Stafford. And on this project, this girl was asked, so if you go to Spain, you will be an immigrant. No, I can't be an immigrant. I'm English. And there's this English arrogance that people do not accept. And we are raised in this way to believe that we live in the greatest country in the world. Not Scotland, not Wales, England. And I think we really need to acknowledge that arrogance, which is why a lot of countries do not like us. And I think it's about acknowledging that and not pretending it doesn't exist. But also at the same time, another thing is, you know, as a experience, I'm 29 now, and every single time I've spoken, most of the time, 90% of the time, spoken to a white person, a white queer person about my experience, I explore, oh, you're being too sensitive. Oh, you're reading too much into it. So when Brexit happened, when Trump happened, I'm not surprised. So kind of told you so. And I think what we need to do is we need to listen. When people of color are talking about their experience, it's not delusion. You need to listen, because this is part of the problem. It's, oh, well, I don't have to deal with that because that's not in my remit. You need to listen and not be surprised about the racism that actually exists in our culture, because it's always been there, and people of color have been telling you about it for a very long time. And that's all I've got to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up there. There's one final piece of knowledge I heard this summer when Brexit was happening, and as America has now ended up voting the way that they did, and which speaks very much to Shabazz's point, not just about being a queer man of color pointing out racism, but also listening to why that person is telling you to calm down or why they don't understand your experience. And it was summed up rather succinctly in a sentence that read something like, we must learn to listen to understand, not listen to respond, which is how we're programmed. You always have something ready in your pocket. Oh, yes, you're too sensitive. Oh, no, you're over-intellectualizing. Or no, stop for a second. And even if that means you don't respond, you're not reactionary, give yourself, your brain, time to investigate, as opposed to just a quick kick, ball change response and then you look like an idiot. So don't do it. Ladies and gentlemen, Scottee. The wonderful performers of Putting Words in Your Mouth. Layla, the running pregnant lady. And all of you for staying, all your questions, and to all our viewers at home, thank you very much, all three of you. Hi, Mom. She doesn't watch, she's got the internet in Nigeria. I'm Le Chocolat. Thank you very much, guys. Good night.